You have learned perceptions. So let me tell you, there's a switch in your body that actually controls this growth protection. It's called, fancy name, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. Really, it's simple. The hypothalamus is the portion of the brain that remembers the values of perceptions. The hypothalamus says, oh, I remember that. That was scary. Oh, I remember that. I love that. The hypothalamus determines the value of the perception. If the hypothalamus says, oh, I perceive something that's stressful, then what's the system want to do? Growth or protection? Well, protection. So what's it going to do? It's going to say, okay, I saw that this was negative, so what I'm going to do is now talk to the pituitary gland. If you remember, in pituitary gland, it doesn't have to be in college. It was a grade school thing. The pituitary gland is called the master gland. Reason? I have 50 trillion cells in here. The pituitary gland is like the government saying, okay, this is our move. This is what we're going to do. Coordinate the 50 trillion cells. So the pituitary gland gets a signal that it's stressful. And the pituitary gland says, okay, let's get this engagement for protection. Well, when things threaten me from the outside, which protection system do I use in my body? Grade school name was called fight and flight. The adrenal system. When you get your adrenal glands working, you're ready to fight or flight. That's ready to move and go do something about it. So it's interesting. The signal goes from the hypothalamus to the pituitary. Pituitary says, I command all the cells to get into protection. And it does it by sending a signal down to the adrenal gland. That's where that comes in. The adrenal glands release the adrenal hormones for fight or flight. The relevance about it is this. Think about it. If I'm going to be in fight or flight, am I going to use my viscera or am I going to use my arms and legs? Arms and legs. So you know what the first thing that the adrenal hormones do? They squeeze the blood vessels shut in the viscera to force the blood to go to the arms and legs so I can run. Simple point. If I shut off the blood flow to the viscera, what does that mean about growth? Growth is inhibited because the viscera is responsible for growth. If you don't give it blood, no growth. Where's the blood? It's getting ready to run. So you shut down growth. That's the first thing you do when you get under stress. Number two, if I'm, running away from a lion that's chasing me and I have a bacterial infection, there's another protection system. Now it's called the immune system. The immune system is protecting me from the lion or the bacteria? From the bacteria, from the interior stuff. Which is more important, fight the bacteria or run away from the lion? The system knows this, and you know what? The stress hormones, this is a beautiful point. The same stress hormones that shut down the viscera and force the blood to the periphery, those stress hormones cause the immune system to shut itself off. Why? Conserve energy to run away from a lion. Relevant? We live in a stressful world out there. And right now, when we have high adrenaline levels, we are naturally shutting off the immune system. Interesting point. The medical profession uses these very same glucocorticoid hormones to shut off the immune system in people who receive transplants of organs and tissues. Reason? They don't want the immune system to reject it, so you shut it off. How? Give it stress hormones. Well, what does that mean when you're under stress? You shut off your own immune system. That's when you start to get sick fast. That's like at the end of the semester when kids get sick around exam time. Now they're stressed out. Now they shut off the immune system. Now they're susceptible to what's out there to get them. And then I always like to add the last, I call it the insult to injury, and it goes like this. If you're running away from a lion, stressful adrenal system, are you going to use executive reasoning and logic, or are you going to use hindbrain reflex behavior? The important point about it is this. You know the hormones? I said they squeeze the blood vessels to force the blood to the periphery. The same hormones squeeze the cerebral blood vessels, forcing the blood to go to the hindbrain so you engage in reflex behavior, not thinking. Point? When you're under stress, you're less intelligent. And the world, we are becoming less intelligent as a group because of the stresses that we're under. We're not thinking clearly. In school, we call it exam stress. Exam stress, try to think of an answer. You can't, because the answer comes from reasoning and logic. And when you're under exam stress, all you're thinking about is running out of the exam room going, ah! And so right away, you're not working on logic. And so the point is, what happens to us when we live in this world under stress? We shut off our growth, we shut off our immune system, and we shut down our intelligence. It's not a great combination of events, okay? Okay. Now comes this really interesting part. I said the perceptions run the program. Where do the perceptions come from? Aha! First of all, the first perceptions that we acquire are genetic. They're instincts. A child knows how to suckle. Well, you don't have to teach it that. An infant will pull its hand out of the flame. You don't have to teach it that. It's built into the system. We acquire through genetics basic perceptions that are used by all humans no matter what period of history they're in. The same instincts that we are using today were provided to humans 500,000 years ago and will likely be provided genetically to future people 500,000 years from now. Why? Because all humans require these. Now, the other thing is this. Cultures change all the time, so you can't program all of behavior in genetics. So the other perceptions start to come from what are called learned habits, and they're stored in the subconscious mind. Learned habit is walking. When you were an infant, you didn't know how to walk. What did you have to do? You learned. You got up, you started to teeter-totter, you could contract your muscles, you started to learn it, and guess what? Today, you walk without thinking. It's not even a thought. It's just like that. I know I'm not the only one when I say this, but sometimes I have people in the car and I start talking to them. I get so engaged in the conversation and I'm talking to them. Well, where's my consciousness when I'm talking to them? I'm talking to them. And then sometimes I look up at the road and go, oh my God, I haven't even looked at the road for the last 10 minutes. But I didn't hit anything and I didn't get stopped. So I was apparently driving the car okay. Who was driving the car? And the answer was, once you learn how to drive the car, it's a programmed behavior. You don't have to be conscious to do it. You can drive down the street and your subconscious with the learned programs will drive the car. Well, just want you to know that the learned programs in the subconscious can be very complex. Your job can be learned and become a habit. And once it's a habit, you can be on the job, doing the job, and thinking about your vacation next week, or thinking about what happened in your life last week. Well, if you're thinking about the future or the past, then who's running the present? The subconscious is running the present. Okay? So we acquire instincts from genetics, and learned habits are stored in the subconscious. And the third level of perception is the conscious mind, which is creative, which is different than the subconscious mind, which is just learned habits. The conscious mind can create new ones. So the conscious mind is really important. So what does all this represent? Genetics are nature. You get that in your nature. I have in my nature, the ability to pull my hand out of the fire. Okay? My subconscious learned habits, that's nurture. When you're nurtured, that's when you learn how to engage in the appropriate behaviors from experience. So that wasn't in the genes. Most important point. Hundreds of years, nature, nurture, nurture, nature. Which is more important? I'll tell you the truth. The answer? Consciousness. Reason? Consciousness can override anything you had in your nurture, and now, and I can tell you about it later, is that consciousness can even rewrite your genes. In fact, in cancer, that's probably one of the most likely situations involved. The reality is consciousness is more powerful than either nature or nurture because consciousness can rewrite both of those, and we never talk about it. And the important part is we never talk about it. It's more important than what we do talk about. So let's also go into this issue now then about learning these perceptions, the ones that we get from nurture and nature. And why is it important? In the childhood development, I can break it up into germ cell development, development of sperm and egg before the fertilization process. And then I'm going to talk about conception. Then there's a period called the embryonic period where the cells create an embryo. It doesn't look human yet, but then the fetal period is by the time it actually, when you look at the embryo, it does look human. That's the fetal period. Then there's birth. And then from 6 to 12, and then puberty. And now what I'm going to do is show you this. Where is nature involved in this period? Well, nature is involved with selecting the chromosomes and genes that go into the germ cells, and very active in this embryonic period because the genes are controlling the pattern of a developing embryo. Nature will show itself again around puberty when new genes are expressed for maturation that weren't expressed up to this point. Nature is the inherent genes that you got. What's important is nurture. Nurture, and this is very important, nurture starts before the fertilization process. And then nurture begins from the fetal period on after that. Nurture is important. Why? Simple point. Do you control your nature? Did you control your genes that you got? Yes or no? But nurture is the environment. Can you control the environment or your appearance or perception of the environment? Then why is it important? Because here and through here, then how you are relating to the child or the germ cells is actually changing the perception of the system. And therefore, you have power over that developmental process because nurture is learned. So let's talk about this. After this one, consciousness, and I'm going to show you in EEGs, electroencephalographs, brain function. Consciousness, as we talk about it, is not a primary function of the brain until after 6 years of age. It's very important, and I'll explain why consciousness did not start earlier. I'll explain why. First of all, the important part that occurs where nurture, where you actually have an influence over the development of your child before the child, is called genomic imprinting, meaning this: the parents, or actually the people who develop the sperm and the egg, actually are influencing the selection of the genes in the germ cells even before they're released for fertilization. It's a very important concept. And secondarily, this is behavioral programming because behaviors at this point will alter the gene expression as well. Interesting point, it starts before birth. The parents are influencing genetic expression even at the germ cell development. Relevance? Conscious parenting is a very important understanding. Why? Because you are actually acting as genetic engineers for your own developing child. You are selecting genes in your germ cells and then selecting genes in the fetus by the way you perceive life. I'll explain that. Conscious conception. This is an important understanding, and it goes like this. Long before you're ready to have the baby, you should be thinking about this baby and what you're planning with it. The reason is this: your perceptions are influencing the germ cells. I'll explain how it works. Inside the cells, there's a nucleus inside the cell, and inside the nucleus are the chromosomes. When we look at the chromosomes, I said there are 23 pairs of these chromosomes. Here's a pair of chromosomes. One of them, obviously, is the maternal chromosome, and one is the paternal chromosome. Each of the chromosomes has thousands of genes on it. So there's 2 sets of genes for everything. One set derived from the mother and one set from the father. So only showing 7 genes. You have 2 A genes, 2 B, 2 C, 2 D, etc. Why? One from the mother, one from the father. Here's an important point. In most biological systems, only one of the pair of genes can be used. You cannot use both genes. So what is happening is there's a process where some of the genes get blanked out and other genes are allowed to express themselves. I have to cancel one set or the other set. I can't express both. So in this case, I knock out the D and E gene in the paternal chromosome. The mother's chromosome will express the D and E. So there's only one gene active for each of these traits. Why is this relevant? Where does this imprinting occur? And it says this: we now know that it starts prior to ovulation in regard to the egg. About 2 months before the egg is ovulated, it's been in an arrested state of development. And then it is activated where it begins the final stages of maturation. It is during this final stages of maturation that an imprint is laid down on which genes are going to be selected. What's the imprint based on? The perception of the parents. The reason is this: there are 2 sets of genes. One in the father, he can imprint some genes in the sperm, and the mother imprints another set and a larger set in the egg. What is the imprinting? The imprinting says, which of the ones should we negate and knock out, and so that it's not going to be expressed so the other chromosome provides it? Or which one should I activate? Why is it relevant? And it goes like this. These are 2 genetically identical mice. In mice, mom's genes favor brain over brawn. Here's what the point is. They did an experiment. And in one set, they activated mainly the paternal set of imprinted genes. And in the other set, they activated mainly the maternal imprinted genes. But remember this, there's a combination of both of them, but these are the 2 extremes. And this is an experiment in a laboratory. Why is it important? Because there's 2 completely different sets of development. It doesn't say that this is male or female. That's not. Both males and females have a set of genes from the father and from the mother. In males and females, I can imprint them either way. It doesn't make any difference. What does it show us? when I activate the maternal genes, this is the shape of the embryo I get. When I activate the paternal genes, this is the shape of the embryo I get. What's different? The paternal genes build an organism that can fight. The paternal genes organize an embryo that will thrive in an environment that is threatening, like an inner city environment. The maternal genes offer a whole different set. What's happening here? Paternal genes, big body musculature. Look at the amount of muscles here. But there's a trade-off. In order for me to build this big muscle, I have to make something less. Guess what? Look at the forebrain size. Look at the forebrain size. I trade it off. Look at the hindbrain. Remember? Hindbrain, this is like if I activated the adrenal system, this is the embryo I would get. Remember? The blood goes to the muscles. It would grow the muscles bigger. The hindbrain gets more blood. Why? Because it's going to operate from reflex behavior more. But in this one, the muscle is reduced, and in exchange, the brain is developed. In a supporting, nourishing environment, this is more of the embryo you would develop. If the parents live in a threatening environment that doesn't support their family or their future generations, they will create an embryo that looks like this. The reason is, in that environment, this will survive better than this one will survive. So why is this important? The imprints were laid down just before the fertilization. So it's the attitudes of the parents within the few months before that conception that are selecting an imprint that will determine some very fundamental shapes and characters of their future baby. This brain is half the size of that brain. And why that's important is I will show you 50% of a child's intelligence can be determined by the prenatal environment and preconception environment. It's very important. You can shortchange a child's intelligence 50% by living in fear. You're going to make a child that can fight, but it's going to compromise the intelligence of the child. So that was preconception. After conception, I want to show you this. This is an evolutionary picture. For the first 4 billion years on this planet, there were only single cells. And after 4 billion years of evolution, cells started to get together in a community. Why? And the answer is very simple. If I maximize the intelligence, let's just say that this cell has X amount of intelligence. How much intelligence does this cell have? X. Okay, and if I put them together in a group of 16 of them, which is a colonial organism called gonium, which is different because they live in a colony versus separate from each other, I have 16 cells in here. Each cell has X. So what's the total amount of awareness of the community? 16. And how much awareness does a single cell have? I got you. 16. Why? When you live in a community, you share awareness. You might only be able to have one on your own, but when you live with 15 others, you get to share their awareness. So the purpose of coming together in a community was to expand awareness. Whether it's a single cell coming into a cellular community or a single human coming into a human community, it's the same evolutionary drive. More awareness, greater survival. Well, the relevance about this is very interesting because when they come together to form a community, the word community comes into play where it wasn't there before. Why is it important? A cell community is an organism. Well, I told you that in the beginning of the lecture. I said you're a community of 50 trillion cells approximately making up your body. Why is it important? Catch this. This is the catch sentence. In community, cells defer their own intelligence to follow the central voice. In other words, a community cannot exist if every member in the community does whatever the hell they want to do. A community exists because we work together for a common goal and a common end. So there's a commonality to the thing, a plan that we're all following, a central voice. Why is this relevant? The cells start from a fertilized egg. They form a community. The community is integrated. The community of my cells are integrated. Every cell is intelligent. I already told you that. I could take the cells out of the body, put it in a petri dish. They don't need the body. They're intelligent on their own. But when they're in a community, they must defer their own intelligence and adopt the community's perception. And this is very important because what would happen if a cell pulled out of the community? And the answer would cause a breakup of the community. What is cancer? Cells that are pulled out of the community. Why do you think they pulled out of the community? In most cases, because the community wasn't operating very well and the politic of that community was mainly anger. And at some point, cells start to pull out, and that's when the end of the community begins. You cannot have people pull out of the community. You cannot have your cells decide not to participate in your community. But all cells have an agreement. It's a law. If you're going to have a community, then you must follow the central voice. Where does that central voice come from? The answer, well, the environment shapes the fetal development. The fetus is a community of cells. The environment is what the fetus is perceiving. The environment is perceived, and as the environment is perceived, the cells of the community will adjust to what it perceives. Well, there's an interesting point, because what the fetus is experiencing is the mother's environment. And so as the mother sees the world, the fetus sees exactly what she sees and responds to her emotions and her feelings exactly as she does. Why? How does the fetus survive? It uses the nutrients and stuff from the mother's blood. Well, remember I told you in the beginning, I showed OBGYN checkup. Doctor says, are you giving enough nutrients to the child? Sure, that's cool. But the other thing is this. The blood has more than nutrients in it. The blood has all the coordinating, integrating communication molecules that make the mother's body function and behave. So the fetus is getting the same signals across the placenta. So as the mother experiences something, the fetus experiences why? Same hormones cross the placenta affect the embryo. It's not a bad plan. Reason? It's nature's Head Start program. What's going on in the world? Fetus can't see it. So what does the fetus do? Rely on what the mother experiences. And as the mother experiences, the fetus will adopt and adjust its physiology to respond to what she sees. If she lives in fear, is that going to be growth promoting to the fetus or not? No. It's going to be protection promoting. It's going to change the genetics and the physiology of that fetus so when it's born, it's ready to live in fear. Why? That's survival. So the parents collectively influence the mother's environment. It's the parents that are shaping the genetics and expression of this child by their perception. Conscious pregnancy. It's a very important understanding because it says this. What's going on during the pregnant period? According to OBGYN, all developmental unfolding of genes. Nothing for the mother to worry about. Uh-oh, mistake, wrong picture. We look at an embryo and we think, well, it's an undeveloped, unfinished thing. It's still developing. We look at the embryo's brain, and the common perception and written in books today is that the fetus brain is not really developed. That in fact, even after the baby is immediately born, the brain is not fully developed. It's even been suggested that babies can't even feel pain. Oh, this is a belief system, and that's why, hey, you don't need to anesthetize a baby. You're going to give it a circumcision? Just cut that skin. It won't mean anything. What do you think the baby's screaming for? Oh, because we're constraining it. No. And the reality is the brain is functional through at least halfway through fetal development. It is functional, and therefore it is not just passive. Two very important books are these books, one by Thomas Verney, the other by David Chamberlain, two brilliant scientists in the field of pre- and perinatal health. These are very important. What they're telling you is, contrary to public opinion that the brain isn't developed, in fact, it is quite developed and quite aware of what's going on. The reason is it's adjusting its biology to that perception of what it experiences. And then to demonstrate this for you, I want to show you a sonogram. And this is a sonogram that was taken in an experimental situation, that the mother was getting a sonogram, and then the father created an argument with the mother, and to observe what happens to the fetus. Now, if the fetus wasn't really paying attention, it wouldn't really care what's going on. Watch this. It's in Italian. You won't understand it. Watch the fetus. I'll play it again a couple of times. I want you to see it. The reason it's very important for this. This fetus is aware of this argument and is responding. Watch it jump. These are convulsions of panic and fear. The child, fetus, is already acquiring knowledge of what's going on and is downloading this awareness. So what's going on during the pregnant period between the parents is totally influencing the expression of this child and the future of this child. So rather than our belief that the mother is just providing nutrients, we must add this important fact: she provides information. She provides information about the environment. The reason is, it's based on creating a child that's going to survive. And who knows, if all of a sudden you live in a war environment, then maybe you better change the physiology of your child to survive in that environment. That's why nature created the flexible, dynamic unfolding of a child. And it's important for you to understand that your thoughts and your perception while a child is being carried in utero are not just yours, they belong to the child as well. And it will learn from that. So, this article then makes sense. Where health begins: obesity, cancer, heart attack, how your odds are set in the womb. We're now beginning to realize that the prenatal environmental conditions profoundly change the physiology and development of the child. This one is an example about weight. Fetal exposure to stress hormones such as cortisol also may have consequences in adulthood. For one thing, rats and sheep exposed to a stress hormone in the womb are born smaller. Would that make sense? If you're facing a stress hormone, what does it do to growth? Depresses it. When the fetus is exposed to stress hormones, it's born smaller and are more apt to develop higher blood pressure later on than those not exposed to the hormone. A recent understanding reveals higher cortisol levels during fetal development shortchanges the development of the kidney nephrons, which do the filtering. As a result, the child will develop with fewer nephrons and not be able to handle the blood pressure issues that it experiences later in life. So it's really important to understand that the experiences of the parents are altering the whole physiological and genetic expression of their fetus. This one is very important. Heritability of IQ by Bernie Devlin was in Nature. And it says, this is a review, an editorial of the paper. The genetic heritability of IQ remains highly contentious. A new analysis shows that genetic influences may be weaker and prenatal environmental influences greater than previously appreciated. It has now been demonstrated that intelligence is approximately 48% determined by genes, 52% determined by environment. Meaning, in a completely toxic, noxious environment, you can shortchange the intelligence of your child 50% just by your responding to that environment. Okay? Now, this one is very critical: bonding and attachment. There's an old story, most of us are familiar with it. Conrad Lorenz, a behaviorist working with ducks, showed that when the duck eggs hatch, there was a moment where they pick up on whatever is the action figure right there becomes the mother. And so what he said, look, he hatches the eggs with him being present. And after that, the ducks follow him everywhere he goes. He's the mother. It's called imprinting. Guess what? There's the most important identical kind of period in human development. It's an imprinting period. It's a period where the fetus, or not fetus now, it's the neonate, excuse me, within the right after birth and in the next few weeks. It's a very important attachment bonding thing. It's not just between the mother and the child, it's also between the father and the child. And the relevance about this is very important. What is important? Direct eye contact with the child. The reason is, the child has a moment window. It's very interesting. At first, an infant can distinguish chimp faces from each other as individuals. We can't do that. It can distinguish human faces as individuals. But a little later in development, just after a couple of weeks, guess what? It can't distinguish the individual difference between chimp faces. It can only distinguish the individual difference between human faces. It's beginning to narrow and focus it down on who is the parent. Reason why. The eye contact and also physical touching is most important, is required to create an attachment bonding. The relevance about it, as I said, the child learns perception. Well, who is it going to learn it from? The one it's attached to. That becomes the teacher. Both parents can be bonding with their child. Reason why, and this is so beautiful, the child is programmed very, very quickly to determine the facial expression of the parents. If the parents are smiling and happy, that means everything is fine. If the parents are shocked or scared or like this, that means something is wrong. Relevance? Watch this if you see infants. When an infant encounters something new in its environment, it is almost, I think it's a genetic program, it's destined to look around and see the parent. The reason is this. When it sees something new, the first thing it will do is check in with the parent. Reason? It will look at the parent's face. If the parent's face is smiling and happy and everything is cool, then the child accepts this perception as being not toxic and okay. However, if the child looks back and the parent's going, like that, that thing that the child was looking at is immediately gauged in its perception device as this is not good. You don't have to teach the child, it's already learning. But the question is this: how many parents are actually observing their kids when they're learning things? Most of them are too busy doing other things. If the child turns around, the parent's not there, then what is going to gauge whether this is a good thing or a bad thing? It's lost. Now it's not very clear. It was designed to learn very quickly by observing the facial character of the parent what was going on. Now here's an important point. If the bonding doesn't occur, then the child will not focus on faces. Actually, we'll start to focus on mouths, more or less. This has been found in 3-year-olds because that's the first time where you can judge autism. An autistic child does not look and recognize its own mother's face or its father's face from anybody else's face. It can't do it. When it looks at a face, all it looks at is sees a mouth. It doesn't even look at the face. Reason? It lost bonding. It doesn't know. And as this book is a very interesting new book by Katie Granju, Attachment Parenting. It's very important and reveals this. This is the scary part. One of the consequences of improper bonding is the child will express the characteristics of attention deficit disorder, meaning the child will not focus on anything in particular. It will just be scanning and will not focus on things. And why is this a problem? Because so much of this bonding hasn't occurred that so many children are expressing it. The problem is that we confuse it with attention deficit disorder. Those are two different things. And the problem is, what then happens to these kids is, oh, this child has attention deficit disorder, give it these drugs, you know, Ritalin or something like that. And the reality is, oh, well, now you've compounded the problem, made it worse. It wasn't attention deficit disorder, it was an attachment disorder that giving the drugs in no way affects this. And in fact, giving the drugs will distort something else. Giving kids neurotropic drugs is probably one of the worst things I can imagine. Why? Well, look, we got to believe that it's a biochemical machine run by genes. If it's not working right, it's not the parent's responsibility, it's just the kid's off. Oh, he's got a chemical imbalance. It's not anything to do with me. Give the kid some Ritalin. Reality is that's another level of our irresponsibility because we have failed to know the importance of the bonding. And we don't pass this on very well as parents. And if we don't bond with our kids, when they grow up, they will not be able to bond with their kids, as I'll explain why in a minute. Importance about this? Duke University did a study of the kids taking Ritalin. This just tears me apart. And they found, but remarkably, they also found that more than half of the children in the community who were receiving stimulants did not come close to meeting the diagnostic criteria for attention deficit disorder. Reason? Parents get so bewildered that the kid isn't behaving correctly, take him to the doctor right away and say, kid has attention deficit disorder, give it some drugs. Why? It's not my responsibility. Give it the drugs, I don't have to worry about it. And the issue is, we're so fast to say that everything that's not behaviorally correct is a chemical disorder that we immediately prescribe the drugs. 50% or more of the kids taking the drugs don't even have attention deficit disorder. But we're in a society that promotes that irresponsibility on the part of parents. Conscious parenting. Conscious parenting, to me, now this is a really important story. And the reason is each one of these others is additive, but this one becomes very important, and it's so easy to explain why. And I'll show it to you right now.